Hi, I'm Marc Mikulich, Technical Product Manager for Small Character Technologies here at Squid Inc. Today in our training video, we're going to discuss troubleshooting our pressure sensor and pressure pump or gear pump in our JetStream CIJ printer. All right, in this training video, we're really going to be focusing on having issues with our JetStream pressurizing or generating internal pressure with that gear pump. If we're not able to do that, we could be dealing with a gear pump issue or also a pressure sensor issue. We're looking at the pressure sensor feedback to tell our gear pump what to do. In this video, we're working under the impression or the assumption that you've successfully filled your mix tank with fluid. So we're to the point where we're trying to pressurize the system and we're having issues at that step. So if you've not yet successfully filled your mix tank, okay, if you're still kind of in the commissioning process, we can't fill the tank up, what you're going to want to do is view our troubleshooting, adding ink and makeup to the mix tank video. You'll want to check that out first before we worry about the pressure pump or pressure sensor. All right, an easy way to tell that our JetStream is not pressurizing is to go into our ink system page and actually watch our pressure reading and pump readings as the system starts up. So if we go to system settings or settings on the home screen and we go to ink system, we have the ability to start and stop our system. So we can start jetting or stop jetting here. In this scenario, we're going to start jetting. And while we do that, we can actually watch our pressure and pump speed values here. So you're gonna, if you think you're having issues pressurizing your system, if you think maybe the gear pump's not spinning up or we have a pressure sensor issue, we're gonna wanna be in here so we can let the system tell us what's going on. Okay, so again, what we're gonna watch here is our pump speed and our ink pressure as we start the system up. Now what you're going to see here in the video is actually normal operation. So we will have pump speed and pressure. That'll give you an idea of what you should see. We'll still discuss a scenario in which you might see an issue here. So we're going to start jetting in this situation. We're just going to start without cleaning. We don't need clean jet to verify that our pressure sensor or gear pump are functioning. So we're going to start jetting without cleaning and we're going to say yes to start jetting. And we'll be able to watch here and see pressure increasing. We should see our pump speed pop in here in a second. So again, this is a normal operation. If we had an issue with our gear pump or pressure sensor, there are a couple different scenarios that could take place here. If we do have pump speed, but we have zero internal pressure, the most likely culprit would be your pressure sensor. If the gear pump is running, if it's spinning up, even if it's completely dry, it should still generate some internal pressure, okay? So if we see a zero reading for ink pressure at this point, that's a decent indicator that there might be an issue with the pressure sensor. If we have a zero for both pump speed and ink pressure, that's a decent indication that the gear pump might be the issue. Okay, so we're showing in that scenario, zero for pump speed, zero for ink pressure. All right, there's one other thing we can look at here that it's sort of related to this scenario. Not so much in regards to troubleshooting the actual gear pump or pressure sensor, but something you could see here as well. If we see a normal internal pressure, but a very high pump speed, it could actually be an issue with our main filter. So if the pre-gear pump chamber of the main filter is getting plugged up or partially blocked, it can starve our gear pump and the gear pump will then start to spin up to higher and higher RPMs to try to pull fluid through and pressurize the system. If you think you have an issue with your main filter, you're going to want to watch our preventative maintenance video, which shows us replacing a main filter. We'll throw the link into that video on the screen. Make sure you check that out if you have high pump speed, but normal pressure. So that's a decent indicator that the pump is starving a little bit. When I say high pump speed, we're talking you know, 2900 plus RPM, which you would see right here, you know, up to 4,000. That would be a good indicator that again, that pump is starving. A normal pump speed range with JetStream, it depends on the nozzle size you're running, but anywhere from about 1700 RPM to about what you see on the display here, you know, 2100, 2200 RPM is perfectly fine. Okay, so our printer is currently jetting right now. What we're gonna do is go into the back of the machine, and we're gonna look at the pressure sensor first. And specifically, we're gonna make sure that we've got power to the pressure sensor and that we're also getting feedback from it. Now, if we are having a significant issue where there, again, is no internal pressure whatsoever, you may not be able to keep the system running, okay? It will fault out if there's no pressure, and it's gonna shut itself down or turn itself off to protect itself. So in that situation, we can at least still check if there's power to the pressure sensor. Getting feedback naturally might be a little bit tricky. So we're gonna look at it from those two scenarios, and then we'll actually look at replacing the pressure sensor outright if we do think that is the issue. All right, so we're gonna open up the back door of our printer, and we're gonna slide our hydraulic assembly out. Now again, our printer is actually still running, just to show you what it would look like if you were able to keep the system jetting, and we'll discuss what we would see if it's not. So be mindful of that. If your system's jetting when you slide this out, you know, just make sure none of your hydraulic lines catch anywhere. Sometimes near the viscometer, that's something to be mindful of. Okay, so we don't need to get it out terribly far. What we're looking to get at here, again, is here's our pressure sensor. So that threads directly into our manifold block, our hydraulic manifold. If we trace this back, you'll see the connectors right here. That hooks up to this little PCB, which is behind this plate. So what we're looking at is making sure we have power to our pressure sensor. We should have 5 volts DC going to the sensor. And then we're gonna look at the pressure feedback to make sure we're actually getting something there. That'll be roughly 3 to 3.5 volts DC. So in this scenario, again, our printer is functioning properly, so we should see both of those items, just so you can get an idea what it would look like under normal operation. Then we'll look at it from the perspective of it either not functioning or the hydraulics not running. Okay, so what we're looking at again is where our pressure sensor plugs into this little valve pump PCB here. So we've got a digital multimeter. We're just setting it to DC voltage. And we're gonna just check at the connector here first. And hopefully you guys can see the colors of the wires here. It's a little bit tough. But green is our top. We've got 3 wires. Green is up top. That's ground. Okay. And then the bottom wire, which is red, is just our power to the pressure sensor. So we should have about 5 volts DC. So if we were to look at our meter right now, we've got 5 volts. So we've got power to our pressure sensor. Okay, our yellow wire in the middle is just pressure feedback. And again, you're gonna see about 3 to 3.5 volts DC on your meter if that's, if we're getting feedback, which we do have. If the system is not jetting or we're not getting feedback, you know, we're gonna get a 0 there. But at least we do know we have power to the sensor. If the system's jetting, we have pump speed, no internal pressure reading on the display, and we don't have feedback here, you know, we would likely replace the pressure sensor at that point. Another note to make is if the system's not jetting, if we don't have power to our pressure sensor, we can unplug it from the board, from this PCB right here. And you'll hopefully be able to see on the back side of the board, each pin is actually labeled, or each connection point. So ground, power, and feedback or signal. You could also test the board with your meter. Make sure that we have power coming out of the board. We'll plug the part number in for that board in the video right here. That is something that can be replaced. But again, if the board's not the issue, if we do have power to the sensor, no feedback, we're going to go ahead and replace that pressure sensor. All right, if we think the pressure sensor is the problem, we're going to go ahead and remove and replace this from our JetStream. So really straightforward on how to do this. One, just power off your system. So we're not jetting, we don't have any power going to it, we're actually going to unplug it. All we're going to do is unplug the pressure sensor from its connection point. Okay. All right, so we've got the connector out. We're going to cut the zip tie here, and then we're just going to back the pressure sensor out of the manifold. So again, this just threads right into our manifold. We're going to back that out and replace it. Okay, really a couple of things, or only two things you need here. One is I just have a crescent wrench to get this out, so this will fit around the pressure sensor. The other is some lint-free towels. Okay, there is going to be some ink inside the manifold naturally, so when we take the pressure sensor out, we do expect a little bit of fluid to come out with it. Again, the system's not under pressure right now. It should be powered off, unplugged. So we shouldn't have too much of a mess, but we have ink normally coming into the pressure sensor, so be prepared for a little bit of a mess. So again, lint-free cloth. We're gonna kind of get that underneath the pressure sensor here so we don't get the rest of our hydraulic system dirty. And this will thread out counterclockwise. Okay, so you'll see there was a little bit of ink that came out, not too bad. A little bit on the pressure sensor as well. You'll notice this does have a gasket on it. A new pressure sensor will come with a new gasket. If you know that this system has been sitting for a really long time, maybe there's even concern some components drying up internally with ink, you can clean the pressure sensor out and give it another shot. So we can spray our cleaning solvent into this insert here, thoroughly wash it out, and again, you could try to reinstall it and see if you get a pressure reading. Otherwise, for a pressure sensor, these are inexpensive and easy to replace. So if you're having difficulties, if it's really giving you problems, I always recommend just swap it out. Very unlikely or very uncommon that these will give you any problems. But again, if it does, easy to swap out. So that's it. To get it out of the manifold, you just back it out. If we want to install a new one, we would thread it in, plug it back in, turn the system on and run it. There's no calibration manually or in the programming if you put in a new pressure sensor. So you put one in, you're good to go. Simple as that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and install our pressure sensor. You'll notice we've kind of cleaned everything up here a little bit. Always a good idea when you're working on the hydraulics, when you're exposing air to the manifold or a component, clean it off as best you can, just to remove any dried up ink or debris. And if you need to use a cloth or a wipe, again, it's got to be lint-free. We don't want to introduce any contaminants into the system. So once we've got it cleaned up, we're going to thread this in clockwise and we're going to reconnect it to our system. All right, we're just going to finish this off with our wrench really quick. Okay, so we've got our pressure sensor reinstalled. Make sure you re-zip tie these wires and hydraulic lines. Again, we did cut one zip tie to take this out, so make sure you just dress that back up once you've verified that the system is functioning properly. So once we have the new pressure sensor in, again, you just start it up. I would start jetting without cleaning and just make sure that we do have a pressure reading. Again, swapping out the pressure sensor should have addressed that issue. Okay, so now we're going to look at our gear pump. So we've kind of covered the pressure sensor and scenarios in which that might be an issue. The gear pump, we're going to again go into system settings really quick here. Just take a look at, again, where you can find the readings for our gear pump or pressure pump. You hear us refer to it as either. So we'll take a look on the display here, and then we'll go into the back of the machine. We'll show you a couple spots where we can get readings from the pump, and then we'll look at actually replacing the pump. So again, if we go into our settings page, we go to our ink system. Right now, our printer has pump speed and it has pressure. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned if you start jetting in this page and you see 0 pump speed and 0 internal pressure, even though the system says it is starting jetting, that is again a pretty good indicator that we have an issue with the gear pump. So if we see something like that, if we see a 0 here and a 0 here while the system is supposed to be jetting on or starting jetting throughout that process, if these are zeroed out, that's when we're going to start going into the back of the machine and looking at our gear pump. What we're going to do when we go into the back of the printer, when we start troubleshooting the gear pump, is we're going to make sure that it's getting power first. We're going to look at speed control to the pump and speed feedback from the pump. So we're actually going to start off with the system jetting. So again, we have normal readings here. Again, in a worst case scenario, these again might be 0. The system may fault out, in which scenario we'd really only be able to check power to the gear pump. But again, we're going to show you what it would look like if you do have both power to the pump, speed control, and speed feedback as well. So our system's jetting. We're going to go in the back and check those readings at the pump. One thing I'll point out when you're working with this stuff, especially the gear pump, if the system's on and powered up, you really at this point should be a certified technician if we're doing something like this. If you're not at this point, this is where you're going to want to get someone who is certified to work on the system. Okay, so we're at the back of the printer. We're going to slide out our hydraulic system. Again, just be mindful, especially on the left-hand side by the viscometer, that we don't catch any wires or tubing on it. But other than that, really easy and convenient to slide this out a little bit. And you don't have to come all the way out with it. This just gives us easier access. So what we're focusing on is our pressure pump or our gear pump, which is right here, okay? So this is mounted to the manifold. There's just an input and an output here. And if we trace the cable from the gear pump, you'll see that goes up to the same PCB that our pressure sensor, our valves, our viscometer, just about everything in the hydraulic system plugs into. So what we're actually going to look at here is our connection to the board from the gear pump. We're going to check that we have 24 volts power, that we have speed control and speed feedback here. All right, so before we actually start checking with our meter to get our values here, our power, speed control, and speed feedback. If you have 0 readings on your display for pressure and pump speed, you could still try to start jetting at this point, and we could at least test and make sure we're getting something from our PCB to the pump. Okay, that would at least help us, isolate or rule out the board that the pump plugs into. So we'll show you how to do that, both plugged in and not plugged in, so you can get those readings. Okay, so our system is jetting, or we've started jetting, and what we're going to do is look at just power first. We're going to make sure we've got 24 volts to our pump. So you'll be able to see here, black is ground, and the far right red is our 24 volts. So if you were to look at our meter right now, we have 24 volts DC power going to our pump. After that, immediately to the left of our red wire, we've got blue, that is our speed control. Okay, so we do have about 2.7 volts right now. And then to the left of blue, we have brown, that is our speed feedback. In the feedback, you'll see we've got about 2.2 volts DC that is actually scaled. So our pump speed on the display is going to be right around 2200 RPM. Okay, so 2.2 volts, 2200 RPM. So again, this is a machine that is functioning properly. This is what you should see normally when we're troubleshooting the gear pump. Okay, so if you're starting jetting or jetting and we don't see the values that we would like to see here, maybe you don't have power to the pump, or maybe you're not getting any feedback from it, you could actually also unplug the gear pump and just check the outputs from the board itself and make sure we're actually getting power from this PCB. Again, we'll plug in the part number for this board. You know, if it's plugged in properly and we're just not getting anything out of it, if we're not getting our 24 volts, whatever it might be, we would actually go ahead and replace this board first, okay? All right, if we do have power to the pump, if we do have speed control to the pump and we're just not getting anything out of it, if it just won't fire up, it's a pretty good indication that we're probably going to want to swap the pressure pump out, or the gear pump, okay? So what we're going to do now is just go over how we would get the pump out of the system and get a new one into it. So very first thing we're going to do is just make sure the system's no longer jetting or not trying to jet, and then we're going to power off and unplug the printer. All right, so we've got our system powered off. Again, we're going to remove our gear pump from the machine and we're going to replace it. So what we're going to do here is unplug it, okay, from that PCB that it was plugged into. So we've got that unplugged. Now we've got a couple cable management ties here that we're going to have to get out of the way. So we've got one right here that's on a standoff. You'll have to remove that nut. And then we have another one on the side here that has a Phillips head screw holding it in place. We need to get that out of the way as well to completely get the cable out. Once we do that, here's our pump and motor assembly right here. What we're gonna do is, you'll see it's zip tied to the manifold. We're gonna have to cut this zip tie, and then we're gonna remove this yoke right here. Okay, and that's what's actually bolting it or holding it down up against the manifold. So you'll see we just have two large bolts on either side of this yoke that holds the pump in place. Okay, for the two bolts that hold the yoke in place, this is a 3mm Allen wrench, and we're just going to back these out counterclockwise. One thing to be mindful of when you do this is, again, there is ink in the manifold. Obviously, the gear pump handles quite a bit of ink, so not a bad idea to put some lint-free towels or wipes around your gear pump. So when we do actually get the yoke off and back the pump off, we're ready to capture any of that residual fluid. Okay, so once that yoke is off and the zip tie is off, our gear pump is going to come out. Okay. If you are struggling tilting the pump out, Especially, you'll notice there are a pair of pins here that kind of help it line up to the manifold. If you're hitting any of that stuff and you're concerned, if you're making a bit of a mess like I am, you can actually just get the 2 diaphragm pumps out of the way fairly easily here to give yourself some more room. So there's just 2 screws that hold the pump plate in place. So we're going to get this out of the way, make life a little bit easier. Okay. And there's our gear pump. So again, you'll see there's a little bit of ink. Not terrible, especially from the manifold side, but we're just going to want to get this pump on a lint-free rag here, or a lint-free cloth, so we don't get ink on our table. Okay, again, there are 2 pins that help line the pump up when you install it. So on the pump side, you'll see inserts for these as well. You want to keep these on the manifold side. Do not push them into your pump. You want to save these. New gear pump, the only thing it really doesn't come with are these 2 pins here, okay? So make sure you keep those in the manifold. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall or install the gear pump. Again, you'll notice the 2 pins here in the manifold, they will line up with the gear pump as well. So you'll see the 2 inserts here. So that's gonna help us get this placed. One important thing to be mindful of when you're installing a gear pump, there is a pair of O-rings. Very important that the O-rings are in and remain in when you install this. If we don't have the O-rings in place and we start the system up, it's very likely that we will leak around here, or even have a bit of pressurized ink kind of spraying out between the pump and manifold. So be mindful of your O-rings right here, and then again our 2 slots here, or inserts here for those pins. So all we have to really do is slide this up. Slide this up to those pins. Okay, and that helps line it up, and then we're going to reinstall that yoke first, and then we're going to kind of dress everything up from there. All right, once we've got the pump bolted back up to the manifold, we can go ahead and fish our power cable back through and just plug that back into the board. Okay, and from there, really we just need to, if you had to take out your diaphragm pumps, just bolt that tray back down that they sit on, and then just dress up your cables. So again, we took off 2 of those cable management ties. Just make sure to go ahead and put those back in, and then we're going to fire the system up and make sure that that gear pump replacement did the trick. All right, so after you're done troubleshooting and repairing or replacing, your pressure sensor, your pressure pump, or maybe the board that they plug into, just go ahead and start the system back up. So start jetting. If you've been starting and stopping jetting a lot, just start jetting without cleaning, and go into your settings, go into your ink system, and just verify that you do have pump speed and you do have pressure. All right, that wraps up our video on troubleshooting the pressure pump and the pressure sensor for our JetStream CIJ printer. Now, if you want to see more videos on the JetStream or many of our other products, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also don't hesitate to head over to squidink.com to get even more information on our entire product line. Thank you.